Wow, welcome back everybody to the Contemplative Science Podcast. I am so excited today about the guest that we have. André van der Braak is here with us, a friend of mine, somebody I've just recently met in the Netherlands, and who really does, is sort of what I think of as the paradigmatic case of somebody who's melding spirituality and science. He is a professor of comparative philosophy of religion. He's also directing the MA programs now in the Faculty of Religion and Theology. He specializes in bringing Eastern and Western perspectives together. And the thing that I want to talk to him most about today is his brand new book, which is called Ayahuasca as Liquid Divinity, which is such a great title. And I've already gotten a chance to check out some of the book, at least quickly, and it looks awesome. So I'm so happy that we get a chance to speak. Hi, André. Thanks for coming on.
Hi.
So Ayahuasca as Liquid Divinity. Let's just jump straight in there. What's the sort of route that brought you here? Because originally you were doing a lot of Buddhist research, Buddhism research in Buddhism, and also in Vedanta, I think, as well. And now your most recent book is on ayahuasca. I'd love to hear a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so my theme is comparative philosophy of religion, and especially the encounter between Eastern forms of religion and spirituality and the West. So I did a lot of work on Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, Zen. I'm also a Zen teacher myself, so that kind of goes together nicely. So I've done a lot about the encounter between Buddhism and Western modernity, but recently my interest also has expanded to other forms of non-Western spirituality. And then I noticed the popularity of ayahuasca religiosity, that young students used to be that they wanted to go hiking to Nepal to find enlightenment or meet a guru. But nowadays they want to go to Peru. Drink ayahuasca and become one with nature. So things have moved on.
Yeah, they really, it is. We are actually in we're in either the second age or the real golden age of psychedelics research today, aren't we? I mean, it's it's really blowing up, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
So, I know that your book, Liquid Divinity, explores not just the experiences. So I have a couple of big questions I want to get into. One is, I know you're interested not just in the experience of ayahuasca, but the tradition and the contemplative practices that surround the use of ayahuasca. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, basically, people talk a lot about ayahuasca and psychedelics in general, but how people use it has a lot to do with different forms of set and setting.
Yeah.
And in my book, I distinguish between more recreational sets and settings. People do it for the experience.
Yeah.
And then a medical or healing set and setting, then it's really about help with depression or addiction or other things. But my interest is in a third type of setting, which is like a religious or spiritual or contemplative set and setting. And that's about people who don't necessarily do it to get a specific experience or to have fun, or not even only to be healed, but as part of a contemplative practice.
Wow.
So these are the people that engage with ayahuasca again and again as part of a practice.
Could you say a little more about that? I mean, maybe people who are listening today, I would be really surprised if our listeners haven't heard of ayahuasca before. That's very much in our zeitgeist. But I think what's not very well understood, people don't talk about it very much, is that there is a spiritual, religious, contemplative tradition built around the use of these plant medicines. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that? I mean, what are the traditions that you've been interested in?
Yes. So in the Amazon, there have been arising various ayahuasca religions, of which the most famous is Santo Daime, which is like a religious tradition that uses ayahuasca as its sacrament.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's not like only a psychedelic substance. It's also not only a medicine, but it's really a sacrament. It has a religious meaning, right? And so it's a sacrament that plays a role in a religious ceremony.
When you say sacrament, do you mean in the sort of Judeo-Christian sense of sacrament?
Yes. So that's like a useful metaphor, right? Because in the whole Catholic tradition, there's this notion that the host and the wine, they're like the bishop's wine. They're like the body and blood of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
Then there's all these debates between the Catholics and the Protestants about should you take that literally or is that
Yeah.
like a symbolic
Yeah.
gesture, right? And some people have different views about that. But that's the notion of a sacrament.
So here they're taking the plant in, and how is that understood then as a sacrament? That they're taking in divinity? Is it literally liquid divinity in a way?
Yeah, so that the plant, the tea, which is basically prepared from two different plants, that the tea is basically like an embodiment uh, of divinity. It's basically a liquid form of divinity.
Wow.
It's like an embodiment of spirits or of Jesus Christ in the Santo Daime perspective.
And
Or
Santo Daime, when you say there, Santo Daime is related to the Judeo-Christian line, right? I mean, it is.
yeah, it
They
is.
use that same iconography, don't they?
Yes, exactly. Yes, they talk about Jesus and the Virgin Mary and
Wow.
the saints from the Christian tradition. And of
Wow.
course, it's
So
all mixed in with more kind of shamanic elements.
wow. 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 It's so interesting. Do you know anything about like how that came about? What's the line there? Is this
Well, the Santo Daime was founded in the 1930s by Raimundo Irenee, and
Ireneo? Yeah.
he was someone who worked in the Amazon. He came from the Northeast, but then he moved to the Amazon, and there he encountered the ayahuasca, and then he received like this sacred mission from the ayahuasca to
Wow.
basically start the Santo Daime.
This sounds it would be a very full on church experience to
Yes,
have ayahuasca given during the sacrament rather than a
yeah,
wafer and wine. Wow.
yes.
So with that in mind, what do you think? Two things. I'd love to hear more about the role of set and setting for
Hmm.
um, for ayahuasca to have the impacts that it might have. But I also want to know a little bit about your. I'd love to just hear your opinion also about psychedelic tourism. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
where we are just flying into Peru for a weekend, and we're not properly members of the church, or we're not part of the community where this is an integrated part of our spirituality. I just love to hear your personal opinion about, does that fall flat? Is it interesting? Is it dangerous? What do you think?
I think it's really problematic.
Right. Okay.
It's really problematic, and it reminds me a little bit of the whole mindfulness hype.
Oh,
Right?
tell me about this. I want to hear this. I love this.
Well, it's like similar with mindfulness meditation, which has its place in the Buddhist Eightfold Path. Is one of
Right.
the 8 limbs of the Eightfold Path,
Right.
and it has its place within a contemplative practice. But nowadays, it's basically being taken out of context and it's being hyped as
Yeah.
kind of solving all kinds of problems. And it's being used by psychologists and psychotherapists who don't know anything about Buddhist practice or who don't know anything about enlightenment,
Yeah.
but they just offer mindfulness to their clients as a kind of
Yeah.
anti-stress thing. I think that's really problematic.
Yeah, we talk about that a little bit on this show,
Uh-huh.
because it's also a view I have about, if you take attention and awareness training out of the proper context,
Yeah,
then you have possibly a problematic practice to go very deep in, because you're not just supposed to be ever increasing your attentional control. You're also supposed to be opening your heart and working on forgiveness and getting right view and working with a community. And no wonder we have some blowback with people having adverse effects in meditation, because you've taken really powerful practices out of a context. The context is what keeps it safe in a way, I
yes.
think.
And this is also happening with ayahuasca.
Tell me about this.
People take it out of context. They're fascinated by the experience.
Yeah.
They want to go on a trip and have visions and all kinds of interesting experiences, but they don't have the background or the context to integrate those experiences or to really embody them or make them fruitful for their lives, because they don't have a practice. They don't know how to practice. They only know how to get high,
Yeah.
basically, as an experience, as an event, as a form of entertainment. Wow, super interesting. But then nothing happens, and it can even destabilize them
Yeah.
in a big way.
Yeah. Yeah. you're not only not going away and gaining wisdom and coming home and being better, but you're potentially even causing more of a problem because
Yeah.
you're not able to properly integrate. What sort of experiences are people having on ayahuasca um, that are that rely on set and setting in the right sorts of ways? Do you have anything to
Well, I
say
think
there?
it's very hard to say anything about the ayahuasca experience.
Right.
All kinds of things can happen, but what people often report is a kind of ontological shock,
Oh.
which means that, wow, I've taken ayahuasca and now I don't know anymore what's real and what's not real. All my ideas about reality, like I was a materialist, but now I'm not so sure anymore. All those ideas about and my concepts about reality, I have to revise them and
Yeah.
look again. So that's ontological shock.
Yeah. That doesn't sound like a fun party drug to have your
Right.
ontology shook up.
Exactly.
I went to my
Exactly.
friend's house on Saturday and lost my ontology.
Right. Exactly. Don't try this at home, right?
um, I actually had I dated a girl for a while who was part of Santo Daime at one time,
Uh-huh.
and she said that very common to her experience of taking ayahuasca was to see spirits and ancestors and powers sort of
Yeah.
come near the church, and she'd be interacting with them and speaking with them and asking them for wisdom. And she was properly part of the Santo Daime church, so
Yeah.
she was this she didn't just do this for the ayahuasca. Actually, she was really part of the tradition, and then occasionally drank ayahuasca in Peru. um, and I remember thinking when she was telling me these sorts of stories that if you didn't have the context of what elders are, of what spirits might be, of what you're supposed to do when you meet a spirit, that
Right.
this would be a very challenging experience to have if you were just flying in with no guardian, like no wisdom as guardianship over those sorts of experiences.
Exactly. So for people that are raised in Western modernity, we don't have any tools, any kind of ontology to make sense of that kind of experiences because for us, well, spirits don't exist.
Yeah,
Or when they exist as kind of supernatural beings.
yeah,
Of course, we always make the distinction between the natural realm and then the supernatural realm as a
mm,
kind of house with two floors. And
yeah,
most people live on the ground floor, but then some people also live on the first floor. And
yeah,
those are the people that believe in God and spirits and are kind of enchanted. And so that's our Western ontology.
yeah.
So we don't know what to do with spirits,
No,
these kind of ghosts, right? It's like,
yeah.
well,
Be scared,
right,
freak out is what we do.
we can't really deal with that.
Mm.
And then we think that indigenous people, that those are people that believe in spirits. But actually, when you go to indigenous people and you ask them, do you believe in spirits? They look at you and say, no, I don't believe in spirits. I just know how to work with them.
Whoa.
I mean, it would be the same as that when I would ask you, Mark, do you believe in oxygen? You would look at me, well, I just simply don't think about that question. I
No,
just
you breathe.
breathe oxygen, right? It keeps me alive. That's all I
Yeah,
need to know. I mean, I
yeah,
don't believe in oxygen. I mean,
yeah,
it's a ridiculous question. So that from an indigenous point of view, it's not about believing in kind of invisible beings. You don't have to believe in them as long as you know how to work with those kind of more than human powers, more than human forces.
yeah,
And spirits is one way of talking about them.
yeah. Wow.
But in the West, we don't have another language. We have no way to make sense of those kind of energies, those kind of aspects of reality. We don't have the ontological bandwidth. That's the problem.
So, because there is this increasing interest in psychedelics here in the West, and we're starting to get some medical backup for thinking, yeah, actually, there's good reason to think that psychedelics for certain personalities, for certain types of people in certain settings, can be really useful. And there is this also, I think, an increasing desire to encounter these plant allies
Yeah.
in a contemplative way. Um, I don't know, like in this project, what did you learn about how the Western mind can interface with this? Is it a matter of everybody who wants to access the benefits and value of this thing needs to, join an indigenous community
No,
situation, or are there take homes that came out of this program for ways
no.
that we can interface well?
Well, I'm doing philosophy, right? So
Yeah, good.
I'm trying to kind of increase our ontological bandwidth in the West.
Yeah, nice.
So we don't have enough bandwidth, and how could we talk about things like spirits, whatever, in a way that wouldn't completely alienate people in the West,
Got it.
right? So that's my. So you don't need to necessarily join an indigenous community or ceremony, but you need to have the kind of bandwidth to be able to interpret your experience in a certain way. And in the West, it's lacking. You have two options. You have the materialist options, and that's, oh yes, ayahuasca, it gives you very nice hallucinations, but they're just unreal, right?
Yeah, got
It's
it.
just a nice trip, have
Yeah,
fun,
yeah,
but none of it is real. It's all a product of your own mind or
yeah,
your own subconscious playing tricks on you. So
yeah.
that's the one option. And
Okay.
the other option is the mystical option.
Mm,
And then people say, wow, I had a mystical experience. I
yeah,
became one with ultimate reality,
yeah,
because that's what we know, right?
yeah, yeah,
Christian mysticism, Islamic mysticism, that's a familiar concept.
yeah,
So then we say, oh, I had a mystical experience.
yeah,
And this is also in psychedelics research. You have the kind of
yeah.
secular researchers and you have the mystical researchers. But to my mind, both of them are too limited.
Yeah.
Because to say that I had a mystical experience, I mean, it sounds very religious and kind of, wow, I encountered God or the source of all being. But people who drink ayahuasca, they report very different things. They don't just become one with the universe. They have very specific encounters with beings, with entities. They have conversations.
Do you
They're
have a
part. Yeah.
favorite story that you've bumped into that you can share there, just for people who aren't familiar with what that experience can be like?
Well, what you hear is that people meet like guardian entities that can help them and give them answers to problems that they struggle with, right?
Wow. Wow.
And they report this as in a very lively way, not like, oh, I had a hallucination. No, I really talked with this spirit.
Wow.
And then, of course, from a philosophical point of view, well, how does that make sense? How can you talk about this?
I love this. I love this point. I'd like to hear more. But you said, as a philosopher, I'm taking a crowbar to our ontology so that I can make I can make some space for maybe
Yeah,
something very special to happen. What is that like? I mean, what are you doing specifically that helps us sort of expand our ontology, or what can we do?
yeah. So what I do in my book is I use a French philosopher, Bruno Latour,
Love it.
and he's like the most famous philosopher that people have never heard of, because with other philosophers, he's like a giant. But if you ask people in the street, I mean, he died 2 years ago. It was barely on the news. Uh, but he has tackled this kind of problem that we don't have an ontology. He says, well, in modernity, it's all the way back to Descartes, things can exist only in two ways:
Yeah.
subjectively, within me, like my thoughts and feelings,
Mm,
my consciousness, or objectively,
mm,
outwardly, the world of matter. So then you have the outward natural world and then consciousness. And those are the two flavors. And Bruno Latour says, well, things can exist in many more ways. There's many more modes of existence than only subjective, objective. And he distinguishes many different kinds of being. And for example, he talks about beings of transformation. And these would be kind of energies or entities that we usually call emotions, right? He
mm,
talked about I experience fear or anger. And the way we talk about it, often we assume that they kind of bubble up from inside us. The anger or the fear kind of bubbles up, but that I'm doing it. But then we also talk a lot about these emotions that they come from the outside. And we say, well, I was in the grips of fear,
yeah.
or I lost
Emotional
my memory.
contagion.
Yes,
Yeah,
emotional contagion.
I was in
Yes,
a riot and suddenly I'm very angry because I'm being
yes,
swept up by the anger of the
exactly.
situation.
So Latour says we should take that seriously and maybe talk about it in terms of that those emotions can you can also talk about it as beings of transformation that basically that we encounter and that have an impact on us and that maybe even constitute our sense of identity, that we are made up out of networks involving those beings of transformation.
Wow. And then how does that then go towards the ayahuasca experience then? So now
And
we've
the
got
idea
we've got
is
an
that,
increased ontology, and how does that set us up?
and that the idea is, so according to Bruno Latour, reality is basically you can approach reality best as a collection of different networks,
Mm,
right? Of all different actors. And those beings of transformation are also particular actors. And he said you also have beings of religion. Those are beings that are traditionally spoken about as angels or bodhisattvas or whatever. And it doesn't mean that they are supernatural beings, but it just means it refers to certain experiences, certain energies, certain forces that people understand that in terms of, oh, this is a bodhisattva, this is an angel, but actually it's more like energy.
whoa.
And the,
Is this like, can you think about that in terms of like emergent dynamics? So like a certain community or like a place in a city might have a certain quality. And the reason it has that quality is because there are emergent dynamics that have top-down constraints. So, individual birds make up a flock, but then
yeah,
flocking patterns also control the birds that are part of them.
exactly.
No one bird knows anything about a flock. Birds don't know
Right.
anything about flocks. They just act in simple law-like ways, and flock tendencies emerge. Is it like this, or can we think about it
Yeah,
like this? Yeah.
similar to that. Yeah. So those higher kind of emergent kind of aspects, they wouldn't be visible as kind of entities, but they would have
No.
a big
No.
impact. So
Right.
like if you have a football team and you say, wow, the team spirit is really there. Well,
Right.
the team
Right.
spirit is
Right.
not it's like an emergent phenomenon, right? It's
Right.
not like it's not a thing that you can point to, but you know when it's there and you
Yeah.
know when it's not there, and it
Yeah.
has effect. So Latour says it's all these different actor networks,
Mm.
and then basically the link to ayahuasca, which is not something that Bruno Latour is talking about, by the way, but I'm talking about it. I'm saying, well, one idea what ayahuasca would do is that it kind of lowers the threshold of consciousness. So it kind of encourages altered states of consciousness, different types of consciousness that are more less bounded
Mm.
and more porous, more transparent.
Mm.
So that we gain access to more and different types of those networks. So
Whoa.
that some of those beings they come within reach. With our ordinary day consciousness, we can't really
Yeah.
reach those beings, or they can
Wow.
reach us. But from an altered state of consciousness, you can. And ayahuasca kind of brings about certain altered states of consciousness, which is basically not very different from spiritual practice, because you can
Yeah.
also do meditation or
Yeah.
prayer or dancing or whatever, and that can also open up this space, right?
Sure.
So in that sense, ayahuasca is just one of the many kind of tools in a contemplative practice that can lower the threshold of consciousness, which makes those types of actor networks available to you, which makes this kind of encounter possible.
It's awesome. I love this. It reminds me a little bit of internal family systems, but
Uh,
now we're talking about wider distributions. So if anybody doesn't know
yeah,
internal family systems, one of the things they get you to do is you start, and this is very Buddhist approach too. You look inside and you see there's not just one finite self, there's not one contained self. Rather, when you under close inspection, it turns out that you're not one thing, that rather you're more like an ecosystem of layers of networks. And
yes,
you can start talking to different networks. You can say, well, look, that part of me is trying to defend me. And then this part of me is in response to that defending. And then I have an executive part that's trying to work it out. So if you can think about not only that happening inside, but you can think about our being part of like the insight into interconnectedness, that we're part of a wider set of networks, then we might have conscious experiences where we can actually communicate with some of those wider dynamical networks that make up our everyday experience that we typically don't have access to.
exactly,
Woo!
and that takes practice. And that's why
Yeah, it takes practice. That's an incredible thing to say. I mean, that you have to. That's a wonderful. What a wonderful outcome. Cool. Wow.
so basically, like in this practice, there would be like three different phases. The first phase is purification, so that basically you have to room to become aware of those wider dynamics and those wider networks. So
Yeah.
that's a lot of purification, kind of catharsis, right? Which also in ayahuasca ceremonies can manifest as basically becoming nauseous or vomiting or
Mm.
crying or right getting rid of stuff, right? Moving through all kinds of processes. But that's like a preparatory phase. And then you have the phase of learning to communicate with those wider dimensions, right? Not only hearing them, but also talking back, so to speak. And then the third phase would be learning to work together with those wider dynamics, which
Wow.
is what in Buddhism you would call bodhisattva practice, like
Right.
working together with other bodhisattvas to save all sentient beings and bring more light into the world.
So it sounds great, and I think you and I are both on the sort of optimism side of this thing. But there's also like a sort of like insidious sort of potential strangeness or darkness in that too, right? That
Yeah,
you could be just generating from the self out some weird ideas, even maybe dangerous or potentially harmful ideas, and then interacting in a weird way with those sorts of things. I wonder. I suspect that that does happen, and I wonder what you do to guard against that, so that you're not just making stuff up and saying, "Oh well, this thing told me to do certain things that aren't very valuable to me or valuable to others."
yes. Well, this is something that you see from time to time that people start to drink ayahuasca and then whatever is already in them, it becomes amplified,
Right.
right? It's like neutral in its amplification, which is also part of the healing process because then ayahuasca would show those people very clearly what's there.
Wow.
So, so a narcissist would become an enormous narcissist, right? I mean, it would be amplified. And this is why set and setting is so important,
Mm,
right? That people don't run with it and basically go on a wild goose chase and
yes.
carried away by all kinds of things. And this is why the ceremonial kind of cohesion is very important, and also
Yeah.
the safety and the security.
Yeah.
And this is why almost always with the ayahuasca ceremonies in the Santo Daime, but also with shamans in kind of more like an indigenous context, it's very important to clean the space, to have kind of an energetic cleansing of the space of the room beforehand, and to basically guard that, to have guardians
Yeah.
who help people stay safe.
Yeah.
And this is so important. And
Yeah.
this is also why I said, well, don't try this at home.
No, no, I hear it. I hear it right away. To have a good spiritual friend or spiritual network
Yeah,
that you can be checking in with for this communication to make sure that it's ordered and
yeah,
supportive and valuable, but also to make sure it also doesn't sound necessarily like a beginner's practice,
right.
because you would ideally want to be a virtuous person,
Yeah,
upright, already aiming for the benefit of all beings, already aiming for the healing of the
yeah,
community, so that this is seen in the context as a wisdom practice
yes,
rather than I mean, if it's a wisdom practice, then you probably already have good directionality to interpret the sorts of things that happen.
right. Yeah.
Wow.
So
Do you
that's very
see?
important.
Oh,
Yeah.
please.
And this is another danger of the ayahuasca tourism, that people are, first of all, not prepared. And second of all, there's no guarantee that the person that they meet back there in Peru, that they are basically on a wisdom path. They also
Yeah.
could be just a local person trying to make some extra money,
Sure.
which is also
Sure.
understandable.
Of
But
course. Yeah. Yeah.
this is like similar to going to Nepal and meeting a fake
Yeah.
guru. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Which happens a lot.
Yeah.
I spent 2 years in India practicing, and
Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
So you know.
you meet all types. You meet all
Yes.
types, and there's no guarantee the person saying, "Well, I'm a great meditation teacher," that they know anything about teaching meditation.
Right. Right.
um, how about the crossover between Zen and some of these ideas? Is there? I mean, you're interested in both. I
Yeah.
suspect that you're creating a bridge, even just in your own experience, between these. How do you see? Is there a relationship between the contemplative training that you get in Zen and some of these things? What do
Well,
you
I
think?
think with in the Zen training, it's really important to whatever you experience in your meditation to not get carried away with interpretation. Right?
Nice.
It doesn't
Nice.
necessarily mean anything. You can have the most fantastic enlightenment experience, and then your teacher will tell you, just let go.
Yeah, it's just an experience.
Just an
Don't
experience,
get attached.
right?
uh,
So I feel that could be a real benefit for people doing ayahuasca ceremonies because they can be completely overwhelmed by all this intensity and all the
yeah,
visions and whatever they view and they see. And then it's really helpful to have the attitude doesn't necessarily mean anything.
yeah,
I just let it go and I just stay in this open, available space.
yeah,
And I'm not going to get carried away.
yeah.
Because sometimes people do get carried away and they feel, oh, I've just received this very special mission from the ayahuasca, and
Mm,
now I should go and tell the world and I should do
mm,
this. And
mm.
well, not necessarily, right? It could be an amplification of their own
Sure,
subconscious
sure.
desires to be special or
Mm,
whatever. So people need to be very careful with it. And I feel a Zen practice could definitely help in staying grounded, having the firmness to basically to stay from kind of to stay with kind of like an empty mind, right?
yeah,
Like a
yeah,
no mind.
yeah. It's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah, you see that especially in young meditators. They have a breakthrough. They have their early
yeah,
breakthroughs, and then they think, well, the thing to do then is I should proselytize this
yeah.
practice to everybody I can meet, and you know,
Exactly.
like
So annoying.
it's so endearing. It's so endearing because you're so
Yeah,
passionate. You say,
yes,
oh, I got it. Now everyone has to come on retreat, and
exactly.
it's always a cooling down period. Just know it's okay. Just engage and relax. Yeah.
Right. And this is also a danger because there's also a little bit of a hype on about ayahuasca.
Mm,
It may be similar as the hype there was about Zen in the 50s and 60s, right? That it was going to give you enlightenment and it was like mysticism. And well, a contemplative Zen practice is also just simply hard work and staying with it and
yeah.
staying at it. But the
Yeah.
same thing is true of ayahuasca. It's not necessarily this shortcut. I mean, sometimes you hear people say, "Oh, one ayahuasca session is like 50 therapy sessions," and
Mm,
etc., etc. So there's a lot of hype about it, which is
yeah.
not necessarily helpful.
No. I love that. I love that. So I mean, this is a book to read. Um, I love that we have people like you in the community who are like sober spiritual teachers, insofar as making sure that we are sober in our orientation towards some of these things. I think we need more voices like that. That this is going to be hard work. Wisdom is hard. It's hard work to be wise. Don't expect to have a silver bullet. Um, that
Right.
there is some effort to be put in and some way of organizing your life and your community. It's really special. Um, in the process of writing this book, is there anything? What was the most sort of surprising or interesting or anything else you'd like to share today that you just really loved from this project that you haven't gotten a chance to talk about anywhere else yet?
Yes, one thing that I really discovered is that I thought, well, we don't have a language to speak about this in the West.
Mm,
But then I discovered that in our own Western tradition, we do have a language for that, and it's within Neoplatonism, which is
whoa,
a big surprise to me because I thought, well, Plotinus is this very kind of ancient metaphysical system, right? And I thought, well, that's not really what it's about. But then I discovered that there was two kinds of Neoplatonism. So you have the Neoplatonism of Porphyry, who was the
yes,
student of Plotinus, and he wrote his
yes.
biography. And he is the rational Neoplatonist. But you also had a Jamblichus, and he was the ritual Neoplatonist, and he emphasized ritual practice, contemplative practice. And when you
Like
read,
what? Like what, for instance?
like basically learning how to work with the gods through
Is it?
ritual practices, it's really amazing, and it goes back to Egyptian religion. And but the thing is, he was accused of like doing magic, right? And so he's almost completely written out of history. Nobody knows about Jamblichus.
No, I've never heard the name, and
Oh,
I'm a philosophy teacher.
goodness.
Wow.
And he
Wow.
was observed in the Arabian world, and then in the 15th century, in the Renaissance, he came back to Europe through Ficino. But still, he's been kind of underdeveloped, and people don't know about him. But he had a concept which is theurgy, like
Mm,
liturgy, right?
yes.
Theurgy. And theurgy is like complementary to theology, because theology is talking about God. But
Yeah.
theurgy is doing God,
Yeah. Working with God.
working with God, working with the
Yeah.
gods.
Yeah.
That was his
Wow.
practice, and that was what he philosophized about. And that's, to me, that was very surprising. This could be a language to write, to think about ayahuasca ceremonies, because that's the kind of practice that you do there. You learn to work with the gods.
Wow. I had no idea. And so would he have been taking, I mean, what to say? Was he taking a realist stance on this work, or would he have been taking us the sort of the same ontological step that you're taking? Do you know?
I think, while being a Neoplatonist, he probably took a realist stance on that.
Right. Right.
So maybe that's for us not really kind of accessible in the same way, but you don't have to take the same realist stance. You could take more like a stance that Bruno Latour is taking, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's still very useful.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
So very interesting. Yeah, for me,
Very
that's
interesting.
a surprise. Yeah.
Wow. Very surprising and so interesting. Um, in closing, I always like to ask guests a practical edge question. So, given all of your experience and
Mhm.
given your many overlapping interests, is there anything that you would recommend to people who are listening as a valuable practice, a valuable way of organizing their practice or their experience, given what you know?
Well, one thing in general, because I want to refrain a little bit from saying, oh, well, everybody should take ayahuasca because
Yeah.
I'm not going to go there, right? But I would say the importance of altered states of consciousness in
Mm,
contemplative practice. Sometimes people overlook that, but and it doesn't matter what you do, whether it's praying or meditating or doing a retreat, right? But it's very important to kind of realize these different forms of consciousness, to become familiar with those.
yeah,
So, and I feel sometimes that this is not emphasized enough. That I think some experiences and some practices are really only possible from an altered state of consciousness
yeah,
with a lower threshold,
yeah,
where the unconscious gets more free reign, and the imagination also is kind of liberated.
yeah. It reminds me a little of Lama John McCransky teaches a style
Uh-huh.
of what he calls sustainable compassion. And he decentralizes loving kindness and compassion programs so that it's not me who's generating love and kindness or compassion, because he thinks that self-help orientation can engender more selfishness, but rather to acknowledge that love and kindness and compassion are qualities out there being generated by the bodhisattva
Yes.
sphere, and that they come in and through me. I'm
Yes.
not radiating love to the world. I'm becoming a channel for capital
Yes.
L love to move here and
Uh,
through the world, so that I don't have to be such a I love this, even if don't take a realist stance on there, it gets you out of the way so that really you can start to have some taste of what it's like to have universal love, because it's not your love, it's Christ's love or God's love or Buddha's love.
yeah.
And
That's
that is
beautiful.
limitless. If you believe it, then that's limitless. So you can just get out of the way and be like, oh, maybe that's what that would feel like.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Andre, it is a delight spending time with you. Thank you for the research, and thanks for being a lamp in the community. I think this is wonderful work, and I'm so excited to dig in deeper.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Okay,
All right.
everybody, thanks again for tuning in. And as always, we'll be back in a couple of weeks, and practice well and be well, and we'll see each other soon.